Historic Preservation Commission meeting, and today is Wednesday, September 7th, and it's 6 o'clock. And looks like we have a call to order.
Chairman Bruce Trimber.
Present.
Vice Chair Jesse Solomon. Commissioner Carrie Schmelter.
Present.
Commissioner Mary Boxbell.
Present.
Commissioner Josh Simpson.
Present.
Commissioner Evan Goodwin.
Present.
Commissioner Carletha Frazier.
Present.
Looks like we have a quorum, correct? Okay. Notice regarding adjournment. The Historic Preservation Commission will not hear new items after 9:30 unless authorized by majority vote of the commission members present. Items which have not been heard before 9:30 may be continued to the next meeting, regular meeting, or special meeting as determined by the commission members. Notice regarding public comments. Every member of the public who is recognized to speak shall address the chairman, and in speaking avoid disrespect to commission, staff, or other members of the meeting. State your name and address and speak when speaking for the record. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any public comments?
We do not.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, Jesse has joined us, so we now have a full commission.
We do have a full commission. Yes, thank you. Adoption of the agenda is presented. Can I get a motion?
I motion to adopt the agenda.
Second. And vote on that. Any discussion? Looks like we have the agenda. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Looks like we have unanimous on that. Adoption of minutes as August 3rd. Did we have anyone that did not attend that meeting? So we all have the right to vote, correct, I believe? That's correct. So we have the adoption of minutes for the August 3rd, 2020 minutes. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes for the August 3rd meeting.
Thank you. Can I get a second? We did have a second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, aye? Aye. Looks like that was unanimous. Again, going back, public comments. I know I always ask that because when we talk about public comments, but there are no public comments, correct? Okay, and there's no old business. So it looks like we have new business, and I believe we have 3 items today to present. And I believe, Katie, you are up first.
Sure. Good evening, Commissioners. Tonight, the first application that we have before us tonight, can you guys hear me? It's echoing funny tonight in my ears. So tonight, the first application we have before us is for 6 Shell Rake Street, which is in the Tabby Roads development. It is a certificate of appropriateness to allow the construction of a new 2.5-story single-family residential structure of approximately 4,866 square feet with an attached carriage house of approximately 1,135 square feet to be located at 6 Shell Rake, which is identified as Lot 31 in the Tabby Roads development. It is located in the neighborhood General HD zoning district. This is the site plan, so as you can see, Shell Rake runs along the front, which is the right side of your screen here, and then there are 2 lanes, so one is Barnacle Cut Lane at the top of the screen, and then Mud Bar Lane is where it gets its access, which is on the bottom of your screen here. This is a visual of how the house will be placed on the lot. There is a question of the parallel to the street, and so they gave us this exhibit as part of their submittal materials, just so that you had a better idea of what that was going to look like when it was being placed on the lot. So as you can see, this is the second lot in from Bruin Road, which is the very, very top of your street. I may have cropped it a little close, I apologize. But this is Bruin Road, and then this is where a future building would sit because that structure will have frontage on Bruin Road there. So they wanted you to see the stepping of that rather than...
Did they submit that because they own both properties and they're doing both projects, or what?
No, that would be future development, but just how a building may sit on that because it does have frontage on Bruin Road, which is the larger road there.
Thank you.
The properties in this development which have frontage on Bruin Road do have to face Bruin Road. So they have Tabby Roads addresses sometimes, so there's some that are on Bader's Lane, Barnacle Cut, those addresses, but their front is Bruin Road. So all the ones that are from Burnt Church over all have that same frontage. So the good example is the blue house that came through a few years ago. That's what they will all look like when they come to fronting that street. This is the first floor plan. So you, again, have shell rake on the right side of your screen. You can see the porch here. There's a pool at the back of the house here. That's not a structure, so just keep that in mind. It's very hard to see on the screen, I know, I'm sorry. But then this is the primary structure with the carriage house that's attached, as well as the garden structure that is off to the left there. The second floor plan, so there is heated space in the full primary and carriage house. There is no second story to that garden structure because garden structures cannot have second stories. So that is a separate structure. And then this is the attic space, which has a head height, possible head height of 5 feet or more. When an area has a possible head height of 5 feet or more, it needs to be counted in order to ensure that it is not counting as a half story or a whole story where it can't. In this case, it can be counted as that half story. It is between 30 and 70% of the story beneath it. So it meets the criteria for a half story above the second floor. And then this is the roof plan, just so that you've got a better idea of how those pieces are being connected. So again, primary structure here, carriage house over here, garden structure on the left side of the screen there. So this is the front elevation. This is the side that faces shell rake. It's hard to say shell rake in tabby shell roads, tabby shell, we're all together. So you can see it has the double full front porch here with the side addition. You can see just a bit of the carriage house behind it here, as well as the first floor of that carriage house with pokes out here. You cannot see the garden structure from the front elevation because it is set back behind the where the carriage house is. This is the rear elevation. So you have the garden structure here. This portion here is your carriage house, and then behind it you can see that. They have provided us sections so that you can kind of see what's going on as you cut through the house, because with the way these buildings are stacked, you can't see them all from one perspective. So again, garden structure, carriage house, primary structure. This shows just a section through part of the main structure, but they also have provided one through the split of the carriage house and the enclosed breezeway here, so you can see what is behind the porches here. And then they've also provided a cut through the unconditioned breezeway, or unenclosed breezeway, which attaches to the carriage house. So you're seeing the carriage house in the bottom picture here. You're seeing the primary structure's elevation here. I probably explained that poorly, but I can go back to all of these pictures. Essentially, they've made sure that we can see every elevation and all portions of the structure with these sections. This is the left elevation, so this is what you will see from Bader's Way, which is where they gain access to the property. So you have the shell rake runs along the right side of your screen, and then this is the garden structure, carriage house, primary structure here. And then the right elevation, so this is from Barnacle Cut, which is the other side. So the garage doors would be on the back side of this portion of the structure right here. And the pool would be behind this pierced brick wall here for reference to the site plan. So you've got garden structure, carriage house, primary structure here. And then supplemental for the right, because there is that pierced brick wall, you can see there are no other windows on the garden structure. Here is the section through the full carriage house primary structure, so you can see those garage doors where I was indicating them. And then this is a section behind the pierced brick wall and through the main mass of that primary structure, so you can see the windows which were behind the porch in here. So you've got things that block it, things that no longer block it. I have included for you all of the sections and details that they provided. They have foundation, piers, water tables, soffits, just about everything you can imagine here, which is wonderful. Thank you so much for giving me all the things that I asked for in there. There's the bracket detailing for the carriage house as well as the primary structure. They have the railing detail, the corner detail, window details here for the trim, both on where there's masonry and when there is hardy siding. So there's details for both of those as well as the chimney. And then we have the window detail and the pierced brick wall as well as the service yard detail here. So you've got the brick detail as well as what those look like on the columns there. Here are the window details. So I put the window schedule on the top right here and then a picture of those windows down below so that you've got those. The door details. I did crop this. I know it may come as a shock to you. I did some of this crop work all by myself. It's not how they gave it to me. But this is the windows and doors. So I cut the doors right where it ended at the exterior doors because the interior doors, they are included in your packet, but in order to be able to read them on the screen, I left it so it was just the exterior doors for you guys tonight. And then all of the door images that they provided for us as well. This is the square footage calculations that they've provided us. So you've got the first floor on the top here, the second floor as you move down, and then the attic square footage that has the head height of 5 feet or more. They've put the calculations that they have over here. And then they provided us some beautiful 3D renderings so that you have a better idea of how this will sit on the site and what it will look like, not flat. That is always challenging. So again, you've got garden structure, carriage house, primary structure, garden, carriage, primary where you can't see either of the carriage house or the garden structure because they are diagonally behind this one. And then this one is primary, carriage, garden, carriage, primary. And I'm going to not do the last three for you. This is the landscape plan, or this is not the landscape plan, but this is portion of the landscape plan submittal set that has the tree removal for the site as well as those trees which are protected. There is a protected tree or two down in this left-hand corner. That was a requirement by the Tabby Roads HARB, so that has been indicated here in the bottom corner. This is the landscape plan that shows the plantings. So there are some live oaks that are being installed here, 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 and here, as well as the existing off-site trees and then the foundation plantings that run around the foundation of this structure here. And then I put the plant schedule in here in case you would like to see it bigger than in your packet. I'm sorry.
I've reviewed it.
It is in the packet that you had, but on the screen it gets really small when it's on the same sheet as the full landscape plan, so I try and get them as big as I can on the screen for you all. And then this is the canopy coverage details. So this has the areas which are all areas that are not covered by rooftops, so it's the 75% canopy coverage, not including rooftops, and you can see that in the hatched area here, how that map has been broken down on the left-hand side here. As this is a certificate of appropriateness application, the HPC reviews the 8 criteria which are set forth in section 318.3 of our Unified Development Ordinance, and they have the authority to take the following action. They can approve the application as submitted by the applicant, approve the application with conditions, or deny the application as submitted by the applicant after they have, of course, reviewed those criteria. Town staff has found that due to the conditions noted below, we are recommending denial of the application as the maximum footprint exceeds the permitted maximum footprint for a structure within the neighborhood general HD zoning district. There are other items, and I will go through those, but that is the one that is the main concern of these items.
What are we looking at as far as square footage reduction?
So the proposed primary structure is 4,866 square feet. It is shown as 4,865 in their calculations. And then the carport structure is approximately 954 square feet. They've got it shown as 1,135. So it is a difference of about 200 square feet where it is, and that is a really rough estimate, guys. My details are in the staff report here.
But those are for two different...
181.
Okay, the main structure is over how much?
181 square feet.
181 for the main structure and
Yes.
garden.
So, and I have an example here of how to show that to you. So, oops, I killed it. So this is the square footage calculations that they've provided to us for the first and second floor. When there is an attached carriage house, because there is a carriage house has building standards that are associated with it, the architecture needs to reflect that there is a break between the two structures in order to be able to have that attached carriage house within the historic district. The mass and scale of structures, the mass of these structures is actually what is the density factor for lots within the historic district. We don't have a floor area ratio. Instead, we have that maximum footprint and maximum square footage for a structure. With this one, the architectural break is shown here with this red line. So in the in the 3D rendering here, you can kind of see here's the architectural break for that carriage house, which is where that square footage would be calculated by. And in the calculations, it's being shown as the portion of the enclosed breezeway, but it's not exactly a breezeway because it is livable space in there. So it's the rear addition of the structure. So this portion here is being counted in yellow on the first floor, and then it jumps over to follow the architectural break in the structure, and they've counted the second floor as just this portion here. So the carriage house has no issue with the square footage. However, the primary structure, when this portion is removed to reflect what's shown on the outside of the building, it exceeds the footprint. And since the density is derived by the square footage and the maximum footprint for a structure in this historic district, it exceeds that with the way that the architectural break takes place in the structure.
So the question on that is, could the architectural designation or points that you're showing here be adjusted?
If the architecture was adjusted to reflect that it took up, so the way that it currently sits, either this portion here could be the carriage house, which would then exceed the square footage for a carriage house, or this portion here is considered the carriage house, and then this is part of the primary structure, which means the primary structure is over on the square footage. So either the architecture needs to be reflective of what they're counting on the inside as it, but right now the outside and the inside are using two different numbers. So they're counting the area on the second floor that's above what they're counting on the first floor as carriage house as primary.
Could we go through these items individually, if that's all right, like you have? And I guess this is probably one of the biggest issues that we have on this project, it looks like.
Yes.
Would it be appropriate to possibly get the applicant to address the way that they've designated this, and if it could be adjusted or something?
Absolutely. Do you want me to open up the floor to the applicant now, or would you like me to go through the items and then have them speak a second?
Yeah, I guess we could go through the rest of the items, because I think this is the one that's going to be the stickler on this project. That's what I'm just looking at, if I'm looking through and reading through this. So why don't we just go through them all, and then we'll address that to the applicant afterwards. So if you're prepared to do that, that would be helpful.
So the second item is that the structure would need to be repositioned to be parallel to the front of the lot. This is something, Tabby Roads is notorious for a challenge with this because none of the lot lines are parallel or perpendicular, to the street which they face.
We've had many precedences.
We have had several areas where this has been something. The diagram that was presented by the applicant has done a lot to show how that is going to be stepped instead of angled as it would be on another structure, so it's not in the middle of a block. The third item is that the number of windows and the pane proportion variation must be reduced to provide a better proportional relationship with one another. There are, I believe it is 10.
It looked like there was a number of them, but we don't have a magic number on that, do we? It's just something that
We do not have a number. However, the typical number that has been used in the past has been about 4. This is a bit larger structure than some of those, and so additional window sizes besides that could be something that's proposed. However, it should be as few as possible. And the addendum text that we use, which is the traditional construction patterns, which is referenced in section 515.5 of the UDO, it notes that for a vernacular building design, it should be that the pane size from the smallest to the largest, not including square panes, should be no more than 20% difference. And so this one it's sitting at about 22% or so. And then for classical architectural design, it should be about 12% variation. So somewhere in between there, if it is a classical design, it would be 12. This is more of a vernacular design, so it would be closer to that 20%. But with 14 different window types, 10 different pane proportions, that's something that should be addressed. The next is the determination on the appropriateness of the use of Borel as a substitute material for those listed in the Unified Development Ordinance. So, Borel. There are several of these because the next, actually just one, because we do not have material regulations for water tables, and I believe soffit material doesn't specifically preclude it either. But Borel is a material, and Josh is somebody who can probably speak to Borel better than I. However, the Unified Development Ordinance for wall material, which is not trim necessarily, however, allows for the use of green or recycled materials whenever possible. So that's for walls. However, this is not a green material. It's probably the opposite of green because it is using ash, coal ash from the mining process, and it is it's a ash polymer blend that creates this. I'm going to just struggle through this, guys. It's going to be great. So it is not a true wood material. It is not a hardy material, but it is rather a combination. So it's kind of a composite material. Josh, please save me from myself.
Whereas hardy is a cementitious material, Borel is a composite material made of fly ash, which is a byproduct of coal-burning power plants, mixed in essence with an epoxy resin. And it's compressed, it's mixed together, and it's compressed, and it has 2 different textures. One that is a more rough wood grain, the other one is a very tight grain. From a distance, it does finish, in my opinion, exceedingly well, and is a good substitute for wood in choosing a composite material.
So it is a green material because it's using waste product from
Recycled material, perhaps. But
it is, I guess if it's using coal ash, utilizing coal ash for purposes of something other than putting in a dump.
Correct. And so as a wall material, this is something that would be considered a recycled material. It's using a byproduct of something else that is doing this. It doesn't specifically...
So why didn't you consider it eco-friendly? Or, to me, it resonates that.
And that's just fine. So the railings, balustrades, trim pieces, things like that, does not specifically allow for the use of Borel or for recycled or green materials in our Unified Development language. However, there is a section of that traditional construction patterns which talks to alternate materials and when they should be permitted. They talk about the 5-foot rule and whether it can be, if it is something that is out of reach, it is more likely to be able to be a material that is not something that is a substitute, or not something that is a standard material, not a wood, a metal, something very durable to touch, or it needs to be able to pass the touch rule. In this case, the way that Borel feels very similar to a hardy material almost, where it is almost cementitious, I'm missing a syllable, material. And staff has no issue with the substitute of these, but a determination does need to be made by you all. It has been tested in the field. It is something that is becoming a bit more of a standard than it has been in the past. I spoke to him for a moment about it, and he has used it on many of his projects. It doesn't chip when it is cut, so it can be cut in the field without creating break marks and things like that. So it is up to you all. There is a whole bunch of information in your staff report about that, but it's not something that staff is overly concerned with, but it does need to be a determination from
Well,
you
this
all.
is the first time this is presented to us, I believe.
Yes, it is.
And reading the specifications on it, again, it seemed green to me. I don't know.
It's a post-consumer waste diversion material, more so.
Yeah, waste diversion. Okay.
In the world of construction materials, it really came on the scene in our area, at least for me, for the first time, maybe 4 to 5 years ago. So I think a lot of our wording and our references to materials predate Borel arriving here and being used as a design product. I think that it has a cleaner finished texture than hardy. The hardy material that is available is no greater in depth than 5/16, which is a little over 1/4 of an inch. Wood siding would not have been put on historic homes that thin without some type of specialty rabbet. So the artisan hardy, which was 5/8 or a 1/2 inch thick, is no longer available. They don't make it anymore. So we're going to continue to see, if anybody wants a thicker reveal of a lap siding, and that's not what's being necessarily proposed here for that use, for the siding, but if anybody wants anything thicker than that 5/16, we're going to see more wood products or substitutions of newer composite materials.
Thank you. Okay.
The next item is that the door table needs to be updated to include the type and finish of the proposed exterior doors. Currently, they say type and material to be picked by GC/owner. We just need to ensure that those are meeting the wood, metal, or metal clad standard that is listed in our Unified Development Ordinance. The 7th is that the horizontal windows or transom windows without a window below them on the right elevation must be revised to be a permitted configuration. So that is right here on this one. I know that's very tiny, so I'll go to the actual elevation. And here on the right elevation. So it is this section here and here. The 8th item is that there are 2 different hardy sidings. The primary siding is a 7-inch reveal with a 3-inch reveal panel that must be revised to only have a change at an exterior corner. Section 515.6N of our Unified Development Ordinance notes that material changes shall take place at an exterior corner. So that, I'm sorry, interior corner. Did I write exterior? I did. I'm sorry. That should say interior. I will show you if I can edit this here. It's okay. That should say interior. I've frozen it now.
It says it correctly in the.
Thank you. So that is on the same elevation, which is the right elevation here. So that is this section right here, where it has got a hardy panel plank lap siding 3-inch reveal. It's just a change from the material here.
You're talking about the inset parts? Is that what you're talking about? I'm not following.
Yes, however, they're not inset. It's just it's been framed out, but it's the same plane here. So that's not a bump out in the structure. It's on the same horizontal plane.
They're just going from a different width to a different.
Yes.
Differentiation. Okay.
Yes. So the use of a change in material in the same elevation or a closed shutter are both not something that's permitted by our Unified Development Ordinance. This is not a closed shutter. It is a siding material. However, the use of a closed shutter, especially when there are no other shutters used on the structure is something that's not permitted by our Unified Development Ordinance.
So in a sense, architecturally, that's getting around the closed shutter, but it's creating the closed shutter look, but it's not. I mean, I'm just, that's what it is.
Probably
It's not,
bookshelves
it's not
on
an
the
uncommon
trains.
detail. It's not an uncommon detail, but I understand what the UDO says. And everything you just.
Everybody else?
The eighth item is that the mass and scale of the structure exceeds that which is appropriate for the property. That does go back to number 1 here, that it's exceeding the maximum footprint of the structure. And then the 10th one is that a tree removal permit from the town of Bluffton is required, as they are removing trees that exceed that 8 inches in diameter at breast height. That's all I have. I am happy to answer any questions that you have. I know that Court Atkins is here to, or specifically William is here to answer questions that you have, as long with his team.
Who's representing the applicant? Okay.
You want to join us at the mic?
I'll be happy to.
Do we want to discuss any issues here before the applicant comes? Let's.
I just, what is the maximum footprint for this lot and the carriage house also?
So the maximum footprint, not including porches, for a center hall house is 2,000 square feet.
That's what I was going to ask you also. Center house. Okay.
So the footprint, yeah, the maximum, this is center house, so the footprint is 2,000 square feet,
What is this one? 19.
not including porches.
This. So the cover sheet listed as 1,999 square feet. However, it doesn't take into account the 181 square feet that is in the primary structure, but being counted towards the carriage house first floor square footage.
So does that mean it's over 2,000?
Yes. By 1,080. I'm sorry, 180. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Make them jump.
So the main structure footprint is fine, but it's the connector piece that is also heated that is putting them over.
It's not heated, it's enclosed though, and so the way that our ordinance is, you can have a primary structure that does not exceed 2,000 square feet in footprint, and you can have a carriage house that does not exceed 800 square feet in footprint. If they are connected, there is a break between the two structures, which has to be recognized in order to allow for a connected carriage house to a primary structure. In this case, the architectural finish of this
What if
shows
it was screened?
it's not screened.
No, what if it was screened?
If it was an unconditioned, unenclosed breezeway, then it would not count towards the footprint of either structure. It would count towards the overall coverage of the lot, but not the enclosed space, because it would not be enclosed space.
Okay. Anybody else? No. The applicant can come forward, please. State your name and.
My name is William Court with Court Atkins Group. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Katie did an excellent job of recapping everything we're trying to do here. I take issue with one or two of the comments, but it's not a personal issue. It's just I think we see differently about the massing of the architecture. Of the 10 staff findings, just in an effort to kind of help speed things along, I don't think we have any issue with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10. If we needed to change things that you guys would be more comfortable with, I do not note anywhere, nor do I believe that there should be a concern about the number of window types used on a project, especially one that has multiple structures and appendages. I would hope we don't get into a situation in this town where we're only allowed a certain number of window types. But if you would like us to reduce the number of them, we could certainly do that. We could absolutely accommodate that. I will echo Josh quickly, just for general purpose. We use Borel nonstop at this day and age. It is a great product. I think if the Borel reps came here, they would tell you how wonderfully green it is. I think Katie's right to be a little skeptical. Like it's as good as hardy. Like we're not tearing trees down, and there is post-consumer recycled content in there, but more importantly, it looks better than hardy trim. It paints better than hardy trim. The finished product is better. The dimensional thicknesses are better. It's a great product. It's really expensive, but it's a great product. It should be considered, in my humble opinion.
Again, this was the first time I think it's been presented to us, reading the specs and hearing from others. Sounds like it's going to be appearing more and more.
I think you're right.
So, if we set a precedent, we set a precedent, and this is something to consider.
So we will certainly change that material if you decide you don't want to set that precedent. I have no problem with that. But I do think it's a great product. I'm just sharing that information.
I think we just, as a board, just need to kind of listen in on that and understand that, possibly when do we possibly start the precedent if this is something.
It's something that I know Katie, we have talked about it in the past. I know the staff has looked into this material. So it's not necessarily new to them. It's the first time it's been brought before us. But we're going to see more and more materials, and some materials will not be considered, and other materials should be considered.
And I guess the reason that we wrote the UDO in the way that we did is we didn't look, at that time, different products other than wood were really ugly and really cheap, and we were trying to prevent that look. So now it sounds like the technology is increased in bringing better products.
Agreed. With respect to the item 7, the doors, all of the doors will either be wood or metal-clad wood doors, so we will happily edit the submittal for that. The 3-inch reveal panels, I differ in opinion on the use of closed shutters as an option to create articulation. I think it can be done very effectively, and there are several precedents for it, but I know that we're not allowed to do that. Obviously, creating some sort of louver detail or look and feel using mixtures of materials is a way to create balance on an architectural elevation, creating the articulation that is exactly described within the UDO. But if we don't want it and we don't want to see it, I'm happy to remove it. I think it will leave a more blank facade there, but based on the desire of the clients in terms of the interior use of that space, we're not going to put windows there. So the best, sort of thing I can do to help create balance on what is a reasonably public street is to use transom-shaped windows and then create some sort of articulation that helps to trick the eye. That was our goal. Happy to remove it, though, if the board sees fit.
Anyone have a discussion on that? I'd like to hear input from others, please.
So, for clarification, Katie, if it was not a different reveal, instead of 7-inch, 3-inch reveal, if it wasn't a 3-inch reveal, but it was an inset panel with a solid Borel panel with, say, a cove mold or something around it, would that be acceptable? Or is it just a change in finish?
But you're just talking about the differences in size from 3 to 5 or whatever, 3 to 6, whatever it was, right?
We had this conversation with staff. I think Katie was actually out that day, but we did talk about it. And the concern was, because my recommendation was, can we just do a solid panel, much like you're describing? I think the concern was that might read like a shutter. And
that's kind of where I'm going with that. If that would be allowed, of the two, if that would be allowed, I would argue that it would, from an aesthetic standpoint, having the illusion of a shutter, to me, would be more appealing than having a bunch of paneling on the house.
So, is this on? Yeah, it is on. Okay, so closed shutters are specifically prohibited by our ordinance. That was one of the architectural changes that did go through town council fairly recently. I think it's like March, but don't quote me on March because it could have been the November issue, or there have been several versions of this. However, shutters, when used on a structure, would need to be applied to all windows which could accept them and be the size of the window that they are put on, operable, made of durable wood, and have appropriate hardware.
We're just trying to create something that looks like that but doesn't meet those standards. So that's what they're trying to architecturally create.
UDO does not say we can't do something that looks like a closed shutter, it just says we can't use
Right,
closed shutters.
yes.
That's where I kind of, so to sidestep that, and this is just from an interpretation standpoint, is there a restriction against doing a panel, whatever shape, solid fashion it is, beside a 7-inch exposure on the same wall plane?
So in other words, let's go back to that elevation and just suppose. Let's go back and just visualize it.
And would you allow if they just used a 7-inch Hardy? I mean, that's not.
Because you're looking at a
great.
substantial amount of these, and that other facade that you buzzed through, let's go back to another facade.
You want a different one? So this is the one in question.
This is the one in question. I thought there were.
Because that's the location where
Out of the picture. Let's just say that we require full-size windows there, and those two are no longer on the table. Let's go to that other elevation that shows.
There's another elevation that shows a question.
So let's, so here,
But in this case, this is more of a louver detail. This is actually meant to feel like an enclosed porch. It's a little different scenario. It's not meant to feel like a shutter at all, but actually an infill.
But this is in the same category and the same problem.
So it is not.
It's not?
It is not, because this elevation, it changes at an interior corner. So material change on the same plane is not acceptable. Material change on an exterior corner is not acceptable, but change of material at an interior corner is an acceptable configuration.
Could I just ask a question? And because there's plenty of precedent, the gable ends up here would technically be on the same plane. And yet there are several great examples of gable ends that are completely different materials.
True.
I'm not sure that.
things of that nature.
Kind of the shaky look or the.
Right.
Yeah.
Not that, again, I know
No,
that's
we
not
didn't.
what we're talking about here, but I just, food for thought.
And I was just, for my clarification, there is no concern with the other elevation that we just had up there?
Because it's inset.
It was these two right here,
It is
right?
offset.
It's
It's a
only
different
these two
plane.
right here, these two windows that we're looking at right here.
Correct.
But it's the same detail that's being utilized on the other side of the house. The only problem here is that it's being considered a closed shutter or different reveal in the same plane.
Because it's not inset.
It doesn't end it.
Because it doesn't end at a corner, yeah.
Correct.
So,
So changing the material, if there's a step in the plane of the building, which there is at the porch and there is at the rear addition on the left side, that's steps, and so that material change does happen at that interior corner where it does not make that change on the right elevation here.
the problem what happens in issues like this is once we set a precedent, you've used precedents in the past and actually have written some forward today, is it becomes what people are using. So we're concerned about setting a precedent on something like this for other people to take advantage of it, not for the architectural purposes, but just for other purposes.
And Mr.
That's
Chairman,
where we walk the fine line as this commission.
I completely understand that, and I would point to this spot and knowing that it's visible and say, I would understand if you said, we're just not prepared to make that precedent in this case, and we will remove them, because I'm not.
What do you do instead? Just put a flat
Siding.
wall?
Yeah.
Just have
you
a,
put-
We may be stuck with that, unfortunately.
Could you put the 7-inch siding in there, then it's at the same
We
plane?
could, yeah, and we could paint it slightly differently.
could
I
you
guess
paint
we
it-
would technically comply.
you could paint it a different color
Yeah.
because we can't tell you what to paint it.
I'd be happy to make that accommodation.
Well,
They'll still-
I would kind of argue then that it's going back to a shutter look, and I think that's the larger question here. Is it's a closed shutter application? I'm not arguing against it as a general practice. We do it all the time, but just that the UDO is stating that closed shutters or the appearance of closed shutters are not allowed. Just by changing the material, I don't think it's neither here nor there. Now you're not siding, now it's a fixed panel, it's not a shutter.
But if we left it as the same siding as right next to it, it probably looks less like a shutter at that point than what this is.
I think it looks odd then because then you have the trim. I'd rather just see the transoms by themselves at that point and then have the siding.
I mean, we could let the vine grow up the wall or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, landscaping could easily cover that.
Anyone else? I guess I really would, I don't have an issue personally if you do it.
I don't want to put you guys in a position where you have to make precedent based on this.
I mean, to me, this is just, I think the elevation, either they go away entirely, including the transoms, or they become windows. I mean, you could, I think landscape was mentioned. I mean, you could go more vertical there to kind of soften that area. I know it's only a 5-foot zone, but it is important, one of the points where this is deviating a little bit from the UDO is, and I agree that it can here, is the fact that you're parallel with this, I think, barnacle cut, which I would argue would make it more of a reason to have for these to be windows if you're making this parallel and that's the street that you're, I guess. So to me, I mean, I would either, for what it's worth, either have the full windows that match or they just go away entirely. But I'm not super strong on that.
I'm going to voice my opinion is I wouldn't have a problem with you utilizing the same material and being painted some other color. That's my personal opinion. Architecturally, I think it would.
I really,
By it, it's not going to stick out and say, "Ooh, look what they did."
I'm not sure I want to design on the fly, but and I know your time is we got people waiting, but
Thank you for acknowledging that.
I'm aware that there is a 2-story space behind that, and there is a need for privacy on this wall. It is possible we could utilize this stair window as a height that we could replicate and move across. Again, I'm okay if you guys say, let's don't do the faux louver thing. We're just not ready. I wanted to start this out, and like most of these, I think we're fine with. We can get where we need to get. We've got 2 big ones that I just want to talk through with you guys. And
Yes.
so,
Everyone good? Let's see. It sounds like you're willing to, but now you're putting another window on that plane, and is that going to look right when you have 2 of those windows and then 2 of the smaller windows at the same?
it's conceivable we could lose not only the small transom windows, but the panels below, and use this central window and basically replicate it at the central window height across, creating a nice balance. I've got to be careful because I've got owners here that are probably wondering what the hell I'm doing. But I do think that that's something, again, either that or we could do just the transoms, or we could remove them altogether, and
Thank you.
we'll get you there.
And everyone, whoever's going to make the motion, understand?
Yeah, I personally am not as opposed to having closed shutters when they're done tastefully. Given the fact that this house does not have any shutters anywhere else,
Right.
I think that it doesn't favor that argument. If it had shutters everywhere and these were shut, I would be all for it. I wouldn't have any issue whatsoever. Right here, just to the right, the other thing though that I would notice, the Borel louver panel to the left and right side of the fireplace, the chimney of the screen porch. In essence, that's a shutter. And then we've got a hardy plank lap siding with a 3-inch reveal detail below that. I would raise question to that space. This is something that came before us not too long ago, the idea of using composite shutters and even New Horizon, which came before the committee, and it was shot down. I was not a proponent of not allowing that because I feel that it's more difficult to get good shutters built out of wood than if these were to be a New Horizon quality shutter. What's shown here and noted here, the Borel louver panel with that vertical component, in essence, it has to be an inoperable shutter panel, so it kind of falls underneath this same category of what we're talking about right now.
To be clear, though, those will be louvers with screen behind. And I mean, I agree. Like, I would not like to use wood, but that's probably where we may ultimately have to fall back to if we can't pull off that detail with it.
I see that being vetted out further down the road, in addition to the Borel louvered panels that are in other locations, but this one wants to be a little bit more delicate.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and just to add to that point, I wouldn't mind seeing that same Borel louver panel detail in the windows themselves. Just from I know closed shutters are not allowed unless they're around the entire house, but for the sake of talking through how it would have been done historically, say for instance there were windows below that transom, someone moved into this historic house and they wanted a TV in there and for it to be darker, so they would close it off. They have a Borel louver panel on the screen porch and they match that detail. So it feels generational, like it could have happened, just for what it's worth.
I mean, if somebody's designing or creating the motion, does everyone understand how to word the motion correctly on this?
Well, I think for these items, really, it does come back down to staff recommendation.
For the motion.
These staff recommendations for this location did not allow it. So if that's where this is tracking, to not allow those 3-inch reveals underneath those transom windows, then that would kick it back for additional design, which I think is what we're talking about.
Well, yeah, or I would just agree that we will modify that.
But that would have to be presented to
staff, right? Staff. So for clarity, if it helps, as long as you guys are okay with the Borel, and if you're not, we would change that at staff level wherever we're using it. We will update the window and door schedule. We can remove the 3-inch hardy panel when it is being used, not changed at an interior corner. And we can update the windows, although I would prefer not to, but we can reduce the number of windows if you guys prefer. I think we're down to kind of the big two, which is the orientation of the lot, and I know Katie put up somewhere in here that slide.
I don't think we have a problem with that.
Because we've got several of them. I can point out all the ones that, but this one in particular seems right.
In that neighborhood, we know that's been
So-
presented to us before, so I think anyone here have an issue with that? Because I know that we've done that already. So we could move on to the next.
So, trying to find the detail Katie brought here. There we go. So we're at the square footage conversation, and to be clear, this house started bigger, and we've been working with town staff to try to come up with a solution. And I thought we had one in the hyphen, and there's a lot of good stuff in the UDO about secondary structures and connecting structures and trying to make a major mass, and trying to break down using simple roof forms and simple connections and basically hyphens. And that's what this is. So I realize we don't have a hyphen type, and we don't have square footage that we're allowed to associate to a hyphen. So we have been very careful to make sure that the square footage on the floor plate itself, which seems to be the most critical, that the main house does not read, in my opinion, more than 2,000 square feet, and that the carriage house does not read more than 800 square feet. So I don't think it's an issue of the allowable square footage on the floor plate, where I think staff is coming back is saying, we're not sure exactly how you're articulating this. And to the best of my knowledge, the way that I can describe it is that with the main house, we really do feel like we are stopping at the door, right? It is a use situation. The minute you walk out into what is garage space, you're in the garage, you're in the carriage house. There is no perfect science, and I don't see anywhere in the documentation where it specifically says you must use a butter knife approach to how we're going to calculate the square footage. So yes, we have gone out of our way to articulate the footprint and the exterior elevation, because this is, and again, this, we wanted to put most of this mass on the alley elevation so that barnacle cut takes less brunt of the size of the footprint. But we're articulating both sides. We are articulating this very carefully to make sure it reads like a two-car carriage house with a hyphen, a connector wing that would have been generational and added over time, and lightly touching the ground, and lower in scale than either of the other two. But it does, because there is no requirement for how we use the program. The second floor is the second floor. This is not a situation where we have a carriage house that is truly a carriage suite, nor does it say we have to use it for that purpose, but we have this square footage on the second floor. We're not over on any means other than if we use this sort of, we have to slice where red is, right? Because in my humble opinion, we've done a pretty good job of trying to disguise and show the smallest main house we possibly could and the smallest appearance of carriage house as we possibly could, and we're using that hyphen connector much the same way you would use a hyphen in a situation where you had a historic main building and dependency wings and hyphens that connected them over time. So I appreciate that we're struggling with the square footage, the way we're adding the square footage, but I can assure you that when we add them all up, we still stay within the allowances unless you tell me we have to slice straight down. And I just don't see that buried in the UDO, at least not in my interpretation. And I know that's not staff's interpretation, but I think you've got to give us, I hope you will give us some latitude, because we should really be more concerned about the exterior articulation of massing than we should be about the exact square footage. I'm playing the game the way I think UDO wants us to play it, but there are so many prescriptive rules in here that I would really, like, I don't even think this is setting a precedent. I think it's just, we have to agree that there is a little bit of a nebulous account for where that line is drawn. And
my question, could you make that a screen porch?
I could cut the whole center section of that out and you wouldn't even get to count it. And I could put even more stuff on the square foot on the second floor. Like, we could make the massing look worse and still comply.
My question is the bottom.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. Like, you could take this blue section. Oops, I can't zoom in, can I, Katie?
No, sir.
You could take this blue section, which is in question. This is the area where I think Katie and
about
staff.
181 square
Right.
feet. Is that, we're just looking at 181 square feet? Is that correct?
I could take 181 square feet and uncover it, and you would walk across a screened closure, but it would look exactly the same.
I know.
Yeah. But
How would it look exactly the
because
same?
we would leave the second floor just like it is. I mean, there would be a bit behind the service yard wall. Yes, you would see a little bit of wall that wouldn't be there. But the reality is the massing. I mean, if we're concerned about massing, and like this has gone to HARB at Tabby. They are not concerned about the massing, the proportion, or the scale. I know that they're not the only arbiters. You guys get the final say, but
I think it's the square footage more than the massing, in my opinion. I don't know. That's where.
I think the massing is pretty
for a bigger
significant.
house.
It is.
And it looks massive.
Yeah, I think the articulation of it is not the issue. It's very well articulated between the different pieces, and it does feel like the main house was its own piece, the carriage house was its own piece, and then it was hyphenated or connected at some point. But I think the idea that the square footage was getting after was the scale that it ends up resulting in, which was the last comment, and I think the more important one. The square footage doesn't bother me, although it is 5,000 square feet in Old Town Bluffton. But it feels big from the perspectives. It feels really large on Shell Rake particularly.
It's a big lot, though.
Yeah.
I mean, if we look at ratios of square footage compared to lot size, there are certainly bigger comparables. So I mean, this was discussed with Tabby Road, so I don't think that and I almost want to take issue with 9. I don't want to be combative about it, but like, why do we even have an architectural review board over there if we're going to say that the scale and proportion are not fitting for the community? I mean, I do get it, but
Yeah.
We're taking into the whole area, that not just that community.
Yeah, I think an architectural review board is different than a historical preservation. Someone's looking at historical precedents of scale.
Yeah, the meeting is the requirements of that's allowed as a center.
yeah.
So
Well, I think we are. I mean, I do think
the only
that
thing we're not meeting is that 181 square feet. Aren't we meeting all the other requirements?
Well, the last one's about massing.
Well, there are 9 other items on the list, but
No, I'm talking
Between square footage and massing.
square footage.
Also the
and
massing.
So the massing,
How do we put our finger on the massing if we meet the requirements of square footage and we have a review board that is indicating that they also believe it's consistent with their own community?
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
please.
again, for the record, as I do most meetings, my name is Richardson LaBruce with Finger Building, Brooks and LaBruce. I'm Hilton Head, and I'm here serving on behalf of the Historic Preservation Commission. So any legal questions you may have, I'm here to answer. We've talked about massing before in the past in the historic district, and it's massing is intentionally subjective under the UDO. It is a determination that's to be made based on place and location and what you'll see presented before you. So massing is intentionally subjective under the UDO. As far as square footage requirements and considerations of the ARB, certainly that can be taken into account when determining whether the mass and the scale of the building, but it is not necessarily determinative. As you all know, in ARB, community ARB is governed by their architectural guidelines. Whatever is contractually agreed to between the owners when they help set up that community. And it is not determinative for what needs to be decided here at the HPC. Y'all have your own set of guidelines to follow, which is set forth in the UDO, some of which are objective. Certain things you just cannot do in the historic district under our zoning laws. There are other things that are left to your discretion. And that's why we have you 7 up here who are experts in your fields and have a good deal of knowledge and experience in evaluating these applications. So you have the ability to make those decisions as to massing and scale.
Again, the word that you've used is objective.
Right. So that there are certain items that are just objective, where you have this can happen or this can't. For example, you can't have shutters on one portion of your building, but not on some other portion under the UDO requirements. As far as massing and scale, we do not have a number or a percentage or just a fixed table where you can say, okay, well, you're within 1 square foot of what's acceptable, so then the mass is fine.
But we do have square footage spelled out in the UDO.
You do,
We have square footage spelled out, but we don't have the objective idea of mass.
and those are different requirements.
I guess I would ask then, since maybe we get this ruling, is it objectively spelled out where the dividing line is in a hyphen situation with connected structures? Is it objectively spelled out in the UDO how you have to calculate that square footage?
I think that is a question right now for the HPC to determine and a question for staff to answer. My familiarity with the UDO is I don't spend nearly as much time as staff on that.
That's why I guess I'm here today presenting, is because I can't find that, and I disagree with how Katie's calculating it.
So when you're saying you're calculating it differently, is that correct?
Well,
and if you calculate it in your manner, are you?
I'm saying if I calculate everything in pink right here, it's $19.99. Everything in blue, I don't know the exact number, but it was 7 something. So on the first floor, we are compliant. On the second floor, I calculate. I can go back to my. Let me go back to my first. When my second floor, we calculate slightly differently because we're basing it on articulation, not on use, because the use is common. Now, I don't see anywhere where we are not allowed to do that because we are articulating the elevation, but I don't see where it says you have to do it one way. In other words, there is no part of the first floor that's non-compliant in my mind because we're stopping at the door of the main house. But if we have something that clearly says, if you have two buildings and you jam them together with a hyphen, you must count the hyphen this way specifically, I haven't found that. So I understand.
Still counts with the square footage.
Huh? I comply to the square footage. So
No, we're over the square footage.
but we're not. I don't believe we are.
How are we over the square footage in your calculations, Katie?
Mr. Chairman, if I can, maybe I can try to address this. So I think the issue is you have a square footage requirement for your carriage house. It can't exceed 800 square feet. And then you have for your center hall building, it's 2,000 square feet. When you have a detached carriage house, that calculation is very easy to figure out. When it is attached, how do we differentiate between where the carriage house ends and where the center hall house begins? Staff's position is under the UDO, the carriage house is going to have a defined end and beginning. There has to be a sort of definitive dividing line between the end of the carriage house and the beginning of what I'll call just the main structure, the center hall house. And staff says because they are going to make that determination based off of the architectural elements of it. So what looks like the carriage house, and from that point they are going to decide, on this particular application, the line I think that was in red, the red line is where the architectural elements stay consistent on one side. And so that is the carriage house. They're going to use those numbers for the calculation of square footage. Everything to the right,
Which is this area right here,
is going to be used for the determination as to square footage for the center hall house because architecturally that's all consistent. What the applicant has said is they should have the ability to create a line that is not necessarily consistent with the architectural element, but rather what is the intended use. The carriage house is more determined based on use than whatever it looks like architecturally. I think that they have both presented interesting arguments. I think that if the UDO doesn't speak explicitly on this issue, again, the UDO this portion of the UDO is the design standards. So in my humble opinion, I think I would likely side with the argument being offered by staff, just because, again, it is a design standard issue. But at the same time, I do think that Mr. Court has made a compelling argument. And again, I think y'all have adequate discretion to make the decision that you think is best in this scenario.
Is there a step down going into this area from the main house?
There is not. There is a threshold. Sorry, and I'm trying to help you guys get back to where that 181 square foot discrepancy is literally right at the line of the back door of the house as you leave to go into the garage space or the carriage house space. So our argument is that is where the main house stops because it is roughly in line with the main house. And it is the end of the intended use of the main house. If we go with that rule, if we go with that philosophy, we are 1,999 square feet on the right-hand side, and we're, I think, 794 on the left-hand side. So we are compliant. We are not over on square footage at all. If, however, we take the position of staff, and I don't want to make their position for them, but I'm going to go ahead and do it, which is, we see the edge of the garage here. It doesn't matter that some of this is garage function and access to trash yards, but because it steps out and that's where the articulation is, that's where we should count the garage, in which case the garage gets way smaller than it's allowed to be, okay? But because of that, we're going to have to count this little portion here and make the main house bigger than it should be, and that's the 181 square foot that staff has presented as an overage. I just disagree with that. Either way, the building is the same exact size. It hasn't magically shrunk or grown. It's just where we draw the line. And I don't believe it is explicit in our UDO. I think there's a lot that is way too explicit about our UDO, but that's not one of them. And my argument is it should be, when it can be, it should be use-based.
Now, there's a step down in the middle of that garage entry area.
Yes, in order to get to, basically in order to get to the access to the trash yard and everything. So we have to step up. We got to make that transition somewhere. I need to allow access to trash. I don't want that door to be in the garage. I don't want it to be in the proximity of the doors of the garage. So it needs to come around the corner. I could move that stair anywhere I wanted in this L if that made everybody feel better.
Yeah, I'm just asking that question because if you move the stair, would that then be considered part of the garage?
I don't think
Because
she's
it's a
saying-
different elevation.
Would be it.
I don't know, I'm just, it sounds like you were battling something here that's,
Yeah,
Works.
it's hard because
It's hard,
there's
so-
not a clear delineation.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What's on the second floor? Is there a second floor of this?
Yeah, it's essentially, it's all part of the main house, right? It's master suite stuff.
So the second floor is being utilized?
the second floor is part of the master suite.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just a pass-through then? I mean, that's, the
It's a
bottom
connector
leg-
that leads to the actual master bedroom, so there is articulation there that says, and this was one of the town's requests, staff's request, is further articulate where that carriage house is, so we bumped that out. We tried to reduce the scale of the connector, right, so the hyphens roof drops. I mean, this is all part of the conversation we've had. I just think we don't disagree on how to count the square footage. The square footage ends up the same one way or the other, it's just, yeah.
It looks like you're stepping down into the master suite, but yet you're not stepping down until in the garage.
So in the master suite, the reason we want to step down right there is to just bring the scale down. Again, this is all about, and there is a lot of great language in the UDO about creating secondary structures and about hyphens and connecting elements and how to go about that. So the goal there is really just to reduce everything. Two things are, reduce the scale of everything that's in the connector, and then also pull the connector and the master suite up against the alley so that from Barnacle Cut, you essentially have a great deal of distance before you even get to that
You're
stuff.
trying to make it look like it was built at different times.
Generational.
Do we have the 3D models?
For the bottom. On the right direction.
So you're trying to make it look like it was a generational house that was built and then this was added and then this was added.
So you're dropping the ceiling in the connector.
This one in the bottom is probably your best visual, bottom left, because really from Barnacle Cut, you're going to see the main house close up. And then you have the courtyard with the pierced brick wall, and the hyphen and the carriage house are pushed way to the back. But that's essentially what's taking place here. We're trying to keep the scale of this roof right here down as much as we can. So we want to step down sooner just to bring everything down.
The ceiling height then
Exactly
in the
right.
bathroom.
Everything gets lower. We want to stay under the main roof of the main house. And
This looks massive to me.
yeah, I'm sorry.
And it
Yeah.
doesn't, I mean, it's
So-
not a personal thing, it just
Yeah.
does. And it doesn't, these renderings don't,
I'll
I
take
get
them
that.
off the screen. How about that?
I get the idea that you're trying to put the hyphen in there as an add-on, but it doesn't relate that way
Well,
in those drawings. I mean, it
yeah,
just
I mean,
doesn't.
I think the goal is to pull that, again, toward the alley, right, to keep it away, and then to allow a pause or a breath in there where the courtyard is. But the scale and proportion of the buildings themselves is not all that different than what's going on around it, right? Like, we're not wildly different in size here. We are, our floor-to-floor heights are very similar. Our window proportions and sizes very similar. I mean, it is a bigger home, but it is not out of scale with the community.
Seems like it is, based on these. And I am not, I mean, I am not a proponent of getting every square inch of a lot in Old Town. It just doesn't reflect the whole purpose of this.
I would say, consider it this way. You have, for the main house, let's call it 1,999 square feet on the ground floor, 1979 on the second floor. When I think about the massing and the scale and the size of this house, I give consideration to that third floor, even though it is noted as totally enclosed and not heated. That is 707 square feet. If we do the math on that, that still is within the allowable square footage size for the center hall home. If we run the numbers, total calculation for heated, total enclosed, it brings us to 5,937, which is below the 6,700 of allowable without giving consideration to the total porches. So
Where are you getting 67?
No, 67 isn't the center count.
the center, I'm thinking about the entire property.
5,500.
So if we add the 5,500 to the 1,200 square foot for the accessory structure for the carriage house, that in essence is 6,700 square feet.
But you're adding the carriage house.
Yes.
So that's a separate.
So subjectively looking at a definition for massing, utilizing the criteria that we have, I still feel like it falls below what, in essence, what we've allowed within the UDO.
What would be allowable if we maxed out the UDO? Yes,
It's
we are
below that.
The
The caveat, though, the thing that pushes it over is the porches of 1611.
So briefly, commissioners, I don't know what page number this is. The historic district, because it does not have, it's subtractive code rather than an additive code. The maximum allowed density is based on the dimensional characteristics established for each building type in combination with other site characteristics that may limit the amount of land able to accommodate density. These other site characteristics include but are not limited to lot configuration, right-of-way, easements, protected natural resources, open space, topography, and parking. Okay, so they've got their parking. The topography is not a challenge. The open space is not a challenge on this site. The lot configuration, they have turned it so that it does fit a larger structure. It does in this case. It does in this case address the lot when you take into consideration this development is a little wonky. However, if this structure were on this lot with the Unified Development Ordinance requires it to be built parallel to the street. If that were the case, the top corner would not be able to be in that location because it would run into the side setback. So you have a challenge of that with the massing. The consideration for these lines not being perpendicular to the street that it is on, or I guess the street and the lot lines not being perpendicular to the rest of the development because they built it at 30 degrees for some reason, that is something that's taken into consideration. However, the maximum allowed density based on the dimensional characteristics for each building type is where this really comes in. So the Center Hall house is identified in our ordinance as a detached single-family residence of between 2,000 and 5,500 square feet with a maximum footprint not to exceed 2,000 square feet. It's 2 to 2.5 stories. And then the notes on it, which are the other items that are addressed with the characteristics of the Center Hall house. It's similar to Seven Oaks or Girard Bluff. It may have a single or double height front porch, may have side or rear wings, which are secondary to the main mass of the building. So this wing, that is the hyphen, this is a rear wing that has been added onto the primary mass of this structure. So it would be counted towards a Center Hall house. A Center Hall house very well could have rear or side wings. In this case, it has a mostly rear wing that is kind of sticking out to the side as well. But then it's also typically 40 to 55 feet wide, which this meets the criteria for that. So because of that description of the Center Hall house, when a structure is attached, so if they had two structures that were detached, it is very plausible that they could have that 2,000 square foot footprint and also an 800 square foot footprint somewhere else on the lot. How this is being configured does not allow for that. With this Center Hall house, it is allowed to have rear or side wings, which are secondary to the main mass of the structure. In this case, that is the rear wing that is secondary to the main mass of the structure. So then a carriage house which is lower in my book here. Is an accessory structure between 200 and 1,200 square feet. It has a maximum footprint, not included porches, of 800 square feet. It is 1 to 2 stories in height. It must be an accessory structure. Only one is permitted per lot unless otherwise noted. It may be used as a garage, living unit, or a home business or accommodation. It may function as a small sketch shop. They're limited to 2 cars with a maximum garage door width of 12 feet, and must be of the same general character as the primary structure. It must be placed behind the primary structure and towards the back of the lot. So, while if this were a hyphen that was unenclosed space, it would not count towards it. That is an acceptable solution. If it were architecturally delineated as a portion of this carriage house mass, that would be fine. If it was a standalone structure, that would also be something that could be found acceptable. If it was a standalone structure and that rear wing was still a portion of the primary house, it would exceed that square footage for the footprint by 181 square feet. So
but it's all going back to where you're delineating this to that.
Right.
So again, we're looking at an objective number here, and objectively we're looking at, is it massing or is it square footage?
Well,
and so I'm just trying to close this up because I think we could talk about this all night long, and we're not going to get anywhere because I think we're all in a disagreement, or there's conversations going on here, and I kind of need to come up with finalization here. So instead of continually talking about issues over and over, where are we at? Help us.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. And so the way that I would look at this is 3 separate questions. You have the first question is, does this qualify as a center hall house under the UDO requirements, which has a maximum square footage of 2,000 square feet? Staff says no, based off of where they draw the dividing line. The applicant says yes, based off of where they've put the dividing line. Ultimately, that is up to the HBC. Does the carriage house meet the requirements of the UDO? I think both the applicant and staff say yes, that it is under the 800 square feet. And then finally, the third question is, irrespective of the first 2, does the entire structure, all of it combined, the entire vertical development that you see, does it work from a massing and scale perspective? Because you take both of those into consideration. Simply because this is a form-based code, simply because it is permitted doesn't mean, or simply because it is within the acceptable parameters of a square footage standpoint does not mean it is appropriate for that particular lot. The way that our form-based code works is you have these housing design types, and you're generally allowed to build those within this, certain square footage on certain lots. But there are differing size lots throughout Old Town. There are different houses to the east, the west, the north, the south. There are different structures to the east, west, north, and south. And it's about form-based code is about a cohesive historic district and a design and massing and scale perspective. So ultimately, it is up to the HBC to answer those 3 questions, but it sounds like there's only 2. Does this qualify as a center hall house and the 2,000 square foot maximum footprint, and does the entire development work from a massing and scale perspective?
One question I want to present to the board is, okay, let's say if we just had the center house, it was already built. We had a proposal for someone to add the carriage house as it is. Would we have a problem with somebody presenting this to us? Because it is looking to me like it is built at different times. In other words, you've got enough articulation there. So I guess, would it be possible for somebody to present this just build the house, then come back and say, I'm going to build this, and we're allowing it?
There's a bedroom on the second floor.
Well, but that doesn't matter what it's.
I mean, you're having it both ways.
So I could have.
Either a separate structure or it's not.
I could easily come back and say, I could have come to you and said, this is the end. This is where we leave the side door. It's roughly in line with the rear porch. It is a rear appendage, but it is in line with the rear porch, and we could have gotten that at 199 or 1999. We could have built that, and we could have stopped, and there would be no garage. And at some point down the road, I could come back and I could say, this is where my garage is going to start. I get 800 square feet. I build it, and I happen to enclose and connect whatever I put over there with what's over here, including the hyphen. And I don't think that I would be in violation of anything.
And that's what I'm trying to, if we're doing historic preservation, we're trying to make things look like there was a possibility of this being built at different times. And I'm feeling that with this, in my opinion, and I think we just have to, I'm feeling that it was built. In other words, you're articulating it in a different...
What about the map?
That's
Like if we run the numbers on it from...
No, I don't have an issue because it's not, if they had a straight wall, forget it. If they had no articulation, forget it. But it looks like the roof lines are different. It looks like, you paid attention to that. I mean, that's where...
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
The challenge that we're having is that the square footage on the inside is not reflective of the external where that break is. If you can go back to that last slide that shows the red and yellow. This is the challenge that staff is having, is that the square footage that is being counted on the floor plan is inclusive of the space that's between the red and yellow line on the first floor there, which is part of that wing. And on the exterior, it does appear to be an exterior carriage house where the red line is that stacks, that is the secondary structure there. And so the inside is the yellow line, the outside is being counted as the red line. So it's that they're counting the square footage on the external is less. The internal and external are not aligned, is what the challenge here is that they're not.
But to that point, exactly what Bruce described is, I could have easily come and stopped the construction here and not had a hyphen over top. It could have been a one-story connector that stopped at the yellow line. And when I came back to you the very next day, I'm complete with my construction. I'd like to build my carriage house now. I can mathematically.
But wouldn't you exceed this carriage house?
I would not, because there's less than 800 square feet from that yellow line.
Because you're doing the yellow line. I mean,
that's why I run the numbers on the two separate allowables.
We stay within the allowables in every case.
They can go together. It becomes a subjective decision of delineation. When it's done so in a manner that looks like it was done over the course of time in a tasteful manner, I have seen smaller lots receive similar, if not more, square footage. This is a larger lot.
Do you think that reflects the Old Town UDO vision?
Yeah, I think, we're looking at this because it's all one blob right now. You're looking at it as just, you're not looking at it dimensionally. And it creates that objective problem that we come across. So
I think the fact that we have a structure such as Seven Oaks that sits beside, the Fripp Loudon home, that we have the dissimilar sizes and scales close to smaller homes. This is a relatively new community within the Old Town area, and I'm not overly averse to the massing.
I'm not either. And how about?
I'm not either. I think it's
just as.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think maybe we go down. I mean, to me, I think the house is awesome. I think y'all did a great job of breaking the mass. And to me, though, I think for me this is objective. I think I do agree with staff as far as, to me, the carriage house either has to be the area in red, or it would have to include both the carriage house and that whole appendix connection. I don't think you can just slice and dice on the first and second floor to get under the square footage. For me, I can't. I think that is, I know that that's the subjective part, but I think it does need to delineate either the whole that whole hallway part, or it just needs to be the carriage house. And so in that, objectively, yeah.
Curiously, if we were to pull, I'm trying to get the cursor to show up here, pull the columns or whatever, the roof form structure out in line, and it really did, I mean, I don't think it makes the project better, but I can certainly delineate that line more clearly in yellow and make that feel like the second floor hyphen was built over time. And this, I mean, I can't do it with an extra garage door, but I could certainly pull architecture forward. I just feel like we're adding more mass. We're trying to actually disguise the hyphen, not celebrate it in this case. But if that were because I'm not trying to get 181 free square feet. I'm really not. Like when you do all the math collectively together, we're still within the allowances. But if the hang up was really just we need this to be better articulated as that yellow line, that can be done.
I think our hang up is 181 square feet. That's
right.
in.
I just think that it has to stop at the end of the main house. Like I
know,
get
but how do you fix that?
Well, you could take exactly where that yellow line is, and you could take that portion of the colonnade and you could pull it forward with a shed roof, and it would appear to step forward as if maybe it had been a carport at one time, and we decided to enclose it, and we decided to connect to the carriage house. I still fall back to that same position, though, that this could have very easily been a one-story structure that we added in onto the very next year, and we still comply. But I get it. So if the goal had been let's celebrate something in between here a little more, let's bring it forward, I could absolutely do that, and we could say that's the articulation.
And I would say that in many ways that defeats other purposes of adding additional roof square footage. Like that.
Yeah, I think you're just adding more mass
to me, it's adding more rather than less. I would rather add less, as I first stated way back, is screen it in.
Well, it's a service yard area, and
yeah,
it opens to I see the reason why it's there.
Mr. Chairman,
yeah, I mean,
just so we can be mindful of the other applicants.
Yeah, we did, because we got two other applicants, and I think we're stuck in a big loop, and we got to try to work on these loops that we get into and just keep hammering on something. How do we come to a decision here?
I think that staff and the applicant and myself not speak. Let the 7 commissioners discuss it and make a decision.
I guess one of the things is we need to come up with a decision, and I think we all have our opinion on it. And let's have somebody. What's our next item that needs to be discussed? Is there anything else? Yeah, on here.
I think we're good.
We're good. One of the other, I do have a question. Is I noticed that in the Habitat or the Tabby Roads, is that they had quite a few. Items for clarification, and I'm just curious, have you met these requirements?
We have been corresponding with Rob, and we told him we were going to, all of these were doable, but we wanted to get through this process before.
So I guess this was, one of the things is they approved it with conditions, and so how are you doing with the conditions? Obviously, they're not going to let you build, but
right.
I just
we're doing fine. I think there was a hiccup between Rob and us and staff just trying to figure out there was a chicken and egg thing. Rob was saying, we don't give you final until HPC gives you final, and Katie said, no, that's not how it works. You guys get the final say. So he wrote us a conditional approval based on a emergency HARB meeting, and they've got a few conditions they want us to address, which we will absolutely do, but we did want to get that in staff's hands so that could be included.
Okay.
But they're comfortable with it.
Okay. So, I know that I don't think we have any solution here as far as the whole commission goes, but I think we do need to come up to a point of making a decision and moving on. And if we could ask if somebody wants to make a motion with the things that we discussed in regards to the information. I think the Borel, we need to address that. I think that would be good if somebody made a motion in regards to possibly setting a new precedent here. Was there any other, the windows, I think we needed to address something in regards to the windows.
The other big thing was just the transom window with the
Yes.
couple of.
So the motion's going to be somewhat complex because it's not going to be able to just copy this, I don't believe, but it will be kind of using that as a guide.
And did you say there are 10 different window sizes?
Plus or minus, yes.
And our usual is like 4.
Correct.
So there are a lot
There
of.
are 14 different window types with 10 different window pane proportions.
So, Mr. Chairman, the applicant said that there are the 10 conditions that there are listed, that they were not truly objecting to numbers 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 10, I believe.
What was,
Yeah, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and whichever one was, hold on. Certainly not concerned about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and yes, 10. That's what you said. I apologize. Yes.
And so that really leaves conditions 1, 2, and 9 as for consideration. So again, you have a staff recommendation of denying this application, or you can approve it with conditions, or you can just approve it without conditions. So if the massing and scale issue or the square footage issues can't be resolved, that's not really it's hard to send that back with a condition to address the massing unless you want to delegate that to staff to deal with. So I think the first question, and we didn't hear from all of the commissioners on the massing and scale question. I think Commissioner, is it Goodman? I think he is the only one we haven't heard from. I believe we've heard from Ms. Vox-Bell and Ms. Frazier as about their concerns with the massing and the scale and the square footage. But if you have 4 commissioners, it seems, that would go one way or another, I can help work on that motion. So if you don't mind, I'd like to hear from Commissioner Goodwin before I.
thank you.
So I don't have an issue with the square footage. You can cut it and dice it any way you want to. I think the articulation of the structures was done really well. It's a really good-looking house. I think the scale is inappropriate for the area of town that it's in, personally.
I know he said that number 3, the windows wouldn't really matter, but that seems like if you're going to cut it that significantly, that it would change a lot of the look, appearance.
And I think the applicant said that they're willing to work with staff on that condition to try to reduce the number of windows and to bring it closer to that number, that 4 and less than 20%.
Size and style of window. It doesn't have to necessarily reduce the window, just make them instead of all 305, 3060, 304, make them all 3060 or down to whatever the number.
So I think based off
Okay, but we do need to address the Borel. I think we're saying that we're not going to allow it, but it sounds like we've had some discussion. There's a possibility of.
I would like to attempt to cover that in the motion as well.
Okay, very good. If you're willing to make a motion, please present it.
I would like to make a motion that the committee approves this submittal based on the following conditions. For item, and I'm reading through the staff recommendations. For item number 1, to allow the square footages as submitted. For number 2, to not require repositioning to run parallel to the front of the lot. For number 3, for the window proportions to be reviewed at a staff level based primarily upon the adjustment of the 2 transom windows on the right elevation. For number 4, to accept the use of Borel. For number 5, to accept the use of Borel. For number 6, to confirm wood or clad exterior materials to be approved at staff level. Sorry, that was number 6. Number 7. Number 7, for the previously stated windows in the right elevation to be adjusted and reviewed for approval at staff recommendation or at staff level. For number 8, the 3-inch reveal below the transom windows to be adjusted for approval at staff level. For number 9, to approve the scale for the structure as designed. For number 10, for staff recommendation.
Motion clear? And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Do we have any further discussions? If not, I'm looking for a vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
So the motion appears to have failed. 4 nays.
We got 3 in favor and 4 opposed. Is that what I understand? I didn't hear I didn't personally hear it.
3 of us.
Okay, well, did you hear a nay? Okay, so we have 4 nays and 3 yes.
So with that motion failing, what we can do is consider a alternative motion. If another commissioner wants to make a motion to, again, approve with conditions and set with different conditions, a motion to deny the application or a motion to approve, the board should entertain it.
I'd like to make a motion to resubmit, or can I adjust my previous motion?
Or it would be a brand new motion, right? Because that motion died.
That motion's dead, so the floor is open to new motions. I would say that I would recommend that you give another commissioner an opportunity first so that they can provide it. But if y'all would like for Commissioner Simpson to go ahead and make another motion, that's certainly welcome as well.
Are we in favor of letting him make another motion, or does somebody else want to speak? I don't see any opposed, so go ahead, please.
I would like to, if I could, cite the record for my reference to items 1 through 8 and have them restated as prior. And then for item 9, for the mass and scale to be studied and resubmitted for review at staff level and HPCR if necessary, HPRC if necessary. In essence, everything that I had said prior, approving square footage, but asking that scale be reconsidered and resubmitted, specifically in consideration of the hyphen connection, so that that can be brought back before staff, back before HPRC for review.
So that's the motion, so do I get a second on that? Does the motion clear?
The motion makes sense. It's essentially delegating the consideration as to maximum scale for staff and having staff make that determination after allowing the applicant to work with staff rather than denying the application and forcing it to go back to the very beginning. We still need a second.
We still need a second. Yes, I'm looking for a second.
Sorry, I was just going to discuss. So if it is denied,
We have to get a second first.
We have a second from Commissioner Smith.
Okay, now we're open for discussion.
okay. If it is denied, then it comes back before HPC with addressing the comments.
Under the current framework, it would not necessarily come back before HPC. So if this motion passes, it's up to staff to make a determination as to massing and scale, and staff to, in essence, work with the applicant on what would be an appropriate massing and scale for this project, for this development.
Using HPRC.
Well, it could go to HPRC.
But they have no voting, HBRC has no voting, but it would just be presented to HBRC.
So ultimately, it's the UDO, it would be vested in the UDO administrator. You know, again, this is ultimately y'all's decision, but, you know, the UDO administrator and the UDO vest determinations as to mass and scale really with the HPC. That's frankly going to be a tough position to put staff in as to making that sort of determination, because obviously they're going to want to work with the applicant. They're going to want to do this and then just cross their fingers and hope for the best. Again, I don't want to try to sway y'all in whatever decision you're going to make, but I think you should be mindful of what your responsibilities are and why staff puts that sort of determination on these 7 volunteer members of our community. So
This is such an objective item.
That's how I feel. Yeah.
Sure. I think I can, we would be happy to, if the other conditions are something you guys can get behind and approve, we would be happy to not only work with staff, but also represent to you there's not a rush to this. I'm happy to come back to, I'd just like to get the remaining items off the list so that we can productively move forward. So if it's a scale and motion, a scale and massing conversation, if we can agree to the square footage and the angle of rotation on the lot and all of that other stuff, I'll be happy to bring that and the windows and everything else back to you guys.
So that essentially would be a motion to table this application to allow the applicant time to evaluate the staff.
Is there portions of this clear? Because
I think the fact that HPC has indicated certain aspects of this, I think, I don't want to push it. My preference would be that you either table the whole thing. I think we know more or less how the commission stands on, out of the 10 conditions, all but potentially 1 or 2 of them, which is something that they can work with staff on if you all decide to table it. Again, your other option is to, we still have a pending motion, so we have to make a decision on the pending motion.
That's correct. We do have a motion, so it has to be voted on. So we were in discussion, so now I'm looking for a vote on that motion. So I guess all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
So the motion dies. So now we have the opportunity to either make another motion or to table it for second presentation. Is that correct?
That is correct, it does sound like the options right now are the consideration of a motion to deny the application or a motion to table. Obviously you have more motions you could make, but just for the sake.
What's the difference between tabling and denying?
Tabling it, you essentially aren't starting over. From a timing perspective, I'm not sure if it's that big of an issue. That's probably a better question for staff. They can tell you what it means from a timing perspective. I would think that you don't have to, if you table, you don't have to pay the $100-some-odd application fee.
And it would go through conceptual and then it would come back to the HPC as a final application.
So,
Tabling it.
tabling it, yes. So in other words, when you just reject it, but tabling it allows it to come back with the same process and procedures. In other words, it's just continuing to come forward again.
If it were tabled, then they would make the revisions that they see fit and be represented to the HPC at the meeting that you all specify.
So can I get a motion to table this applicant?
I'll make a motion to table the application.
Can I get a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? So we have all in favor. Okay. You said that we have to tell them when the next meeting, or that's something that they have to decide, or that's staff, isn't it?
That's going to be where applicant and staff and when they will be presented. So there, certain items were not explicit, but it does appear that Commissioner Smelter, Simpson, Trimber, and Goodwin had no issues with the square footage allocation. But it was more about the massing and scale. So essentially, this brings it largely to what Commissioner Simpson had requested in that second motion. It's going to go back to staff, or the applicant and staff are going to work to try to get a consensus on massing and scale and bring this back before the commission, hopefully with either a recommendation one way or another from staff and a position from the applicant for a final determination.
Is that clear?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, next, we're on to our next item, and it looks like, Katie, you're on to the next item, I believe.
The second item we have before us tonight is a certificate of appropriateness for an addition of 102 square feet. It's an outdoor shower area on an existing structure of 2,578 square feet. It's a single-family residence. It's located at 5774 Yaupon Road, which is lot 17A in the Stock Farm development. It's in the Old Town Bluffton Historic District, and it's zoned neighborhood general. On the site plan, or a portion of the site plan here, this is the rear of the structure. You'll be able to see it better in the elevations, and it is in your staff reports that you have before you today. On the left-hand side is what is currently existing. On the right-hand side is what is being proposed. So you can see here I've clouded it in red for you, but it is an outdoor shower area. The reason this is coming before you is because when something adds a roof over it, no matter if it is a porch, a shower, a whatever, if there is square footage being added under a roof, it has to come before the Historic Preservation Commission. So these are the rear elevations, which is where you will see it the most. The rear elevation on the left, again, is that which is, the rendering and the elevation beneath it is what currently exists. And the elevation on the right-hand side is the proposed modification to the structure. So you can see that there is the roof overhang here. They've changed the window that currently exists to a French door, and they have proposed this screening so that there is an outdoor shower in this space. This is something that we have seen before. We've seen it in this neighborhood actually before as well. So I'm going through it kind of fast. I am happy to slow down, go backwards, do whatever you'd like in order to answer any questions you have. Again, top one is the left elevation. You can see below, here's where it will show on the left side. You've got the roof overhang as well as the porch, which has the screening around it in order to allow for that shower. From the right elevation, you will kind of see it, but it is behind the screen porch, so you'll see the roof overhang is behind the unheated, unconditioned, unenclosed breezeway that attaches to the carriage house, as well as the screening behind it. And then they have provided the sections and details. From the garage, they did not, they did, but this includes the garage. So they provided the rear elevation that you're going to see if you were standing between the carriage house and the house, but this is if you were standing on the street looking at the back of the structure. So it is partially covered by the carriage house, and then you can see the portion of the screening, you can see portion of the roof, you can see the French doors as well as the stairs up. So this is kind of like a Nautilus shell where it wraps around, so whoever is standing on this street, if they were standing where my mouse is on your screen, they would not be looking at somebody in that outdoor shower, they would be looking at a panel of wall. So you can see on the site plan here how that kind of wraps around. So there is a panel there as well as the other thing. The landscape plan, it is very minimal because the landscaping for this site does exist. They are not removing anything except for a couple little shrubs, but they are proposing to add 6 3-gallon azaleas as well as, I can't read that because my eyesight is going. However, there are a couple other plantings. I'm sorry?
Some plants.
Plants. They are shrubs. They are ground cover. So that is all that's being added to the site. No trees are being removed. No other canopy coverage is being altered. The agency considers the same 8 review criteria that are located in Section 318.3 of our Unified Development Ordinance when they take into consideration an application for a certificate of appropriateness, and they can approve the application as submitted by the applicant, approve the application with conditions, or deny the application as submitted by the applicant. Town staff found that the only condition that we have is that a detail showing the sewer connection for the outdoor shower needs to be provided to watershed management. This was something that was addressed at HPRC, but we just didn't have the details, so we need to see how that connects into the sewer connection. before we can issue the final approval, but there are no challenges with the rest of the design criteria. The applicant is here to
The
speak on it.
applicant is here. Is there any issues with the connection? Remember, that was a discussion, but wasn't there some discussion that you were going to connect this, correct? Or wasn't there?
We're waiting for feedback from code official. Let's see what the best way, if we go on each way, and we'll fine with doing that as a staff level approval.
Does it state, is there a code that states that outdoor showers must be connected to a sewer?
That's the one.
See, that's what I thought we discussed,
Yeah.
and I thought there was something that you guys were uncovering that.
You're going to do this.
Kathleen Duncan, J.K. Tiller. We had discussed doing an infiltration basin underneath, and so there was an internal email that went through talking about that with some kind of preliminary discussions where we did not encounter any negative feedback regarding that. We just need to actually provide the details so that they can review that as a part of it.
So we need to possibly incorporate that into our motion. If we make a motion that not only you have the ability to connect the shower or whatever you called it, a basin.
Infiltration basin, yeah.
Yeah, so that's another possibility, if it's allowed.
Mr.
If
Chairman.
watershed or,
If I might suggest just altering the language, provide a detail showing the connection for the outdoor sewer for watershed management review, that would allow them to do it however watershed sees fit. They do have the stormwater manual that they have to abide by. So if it is something that is an alternate to connection to the sewer but still manages to infiltrate that so it's not an illicit discharge, if you just take out the word sewer from that provided recommendation, it would meet the intent there.
that's what I remember from
And
the
yeah.
HPRC, so I would hope that we incorporate that into our motion.
And they interpreted the water coming off of the outdoor shower similarly as you would washing a car in your driveway. So they did not determine that. I recall that in the email.
So again, the wording needs to be worded in that manner so that it's allowing them to do either or.
But first of all, we went straight in. Thank you guys. I've been there.
And I don't know if
I
you
just want
guys,
to make a comment. This is the most overqualified outdoor shower.
It is.
Parking
This
track
is-
in Arkansas.
just FYI, is Chris used to be
Crazy plans.
Chris used to be the chair of this committee, so just
I was thinking getting a civil engineer to provide that, just so that we had that.
so anyway, just
I think per staff level, I've just been slammed at work, so I didn't provide that detail. It's my fault.
okay. Thanks. So I guess I'm looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve this application, contingent on them providing detail showing the connection for the outdoor shower that would allow them to proceed however watershed sees fit.
Any discussion? All in favor? Boy, there's a lot of drawings for an outside shower. All in favor? Any opposed? You know,
Somebody's got that. Somebody's got that.
somebody's got to use a lot of printing.
Sorry. It's because of all the drawings that I was able to move so quickly.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, looks like we have Glenn up
Mr.
next.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we have a recusal for item number 3.
Hey, yes.
Yes, I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay, thank you. That still leaves us with a quorum, correct? All right.
Sorry.
And is the applicant here? Yes, you are acting as the applicant. Hello. And it looks like we have Glenn as the presenter.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Glenn.
Good evening, sir. We have tonight an application for a renovation and reconstruction for number 3 Wharf Street.
Did I do something to break it just for you?
The applicant is looking to renovate and reconstruct the 546 square foot contributing resource we know as the Corin Hayward home, or number 3 Wharf Street, or also known as the Little Greenhouse on the corner, in the Old Town Bluffton Historic District and Zone Neighborhood General HD. For your reference, this is a location map, southeast corner, Wharf Street, May River Road, across from the watershed building, which you all know from previous HPC meeting. Current site plan, the house on the lot facing Wharf Street. Historic photograph, as the historic preservationist, I like to throw these in here. This is from the 2008 Historic Resource Survey, showing the house in a little bit better condition. And then current conditions, this was of January of this year. Front elevation, side elevation, rear elevation, and the southern elevation of the house. In March, we photographed showing the front porch. And if you're curious about what the inside looks like, that's the inside looking from the front door looking east. So tonight, you're to consider 8 review criteria set forth in section 3.18.3 of the UDO. Furthermore, you have the authorization to approve the application as submitted, approve with conditions, or deny the application as submitted by the applicant. Under the relevant review career, there's only 2 things that cause concern with staff. Under 318.3A, consistency with the Secretary of Interior standards. Standard number 2 states that, in part, the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials shall be avoided. All historic materials will need to be evaluated, repaired, or replaced with like in-kind as needed. Any historic materials which will be required replacement will need to be identified in the building permit drawings for compliance. Second, under 318.3C, the application must be in conformance with the applicable provisions provided in Article 5 design standards. In Section 515.6H, porch columns are required to be 6 inches minimum with or without capitals and bases. The elevations proposed are 4x4 columns, which is actually what is there now. While this does not meet the requirement of the UDO, town staff finds that the existing columns should be replicated to as close to provisions allowed in the building code and as close to what they look like now. But that's a HPC final determination of appropriateness of that reduced column size.
So we need to address that. If somebody's making a motion, we need to address that as either allowing or disallowing or going to the 6 inches.
That's correct.
Noting it. Okay.
To give you a better sense of what we're talking about when we're looking at column size, the photograph on the left, current condition, the drawing on the right shows the drawing, indicating that it looks similar, which is what, as a historic preservationist town staff, is what we would be looking for. So the reduced 4x4 size.
So it needs to be noted.
That's correct.
Okay.
So staff recommendation, we recommend the HPC approve the application with the conditions that any materials which require replacement will be identified in the building permit drawings, compliance per section 318.3A, and with a determination of the appropriateness of the reduced porch columns from a 6x6, which is a requirement by the UDO, to a 4x4 per section of the 516.6H of the UDO. I will take any questions that you might have.
I have a question for the applicant. I'm looking at the back porch, and it looks like there's like a sunburst star or something like that in the ceiling. What is that? Here, can we look at some pictures or no? I don't know. This is just for my own curiosity.
Is this in the packet?
Yes. On the drawing.
On the floor plan.
Yeah, on the floor plan. See, I mean,
A102?
yeah, A102. It's just it's just for my own curiosity. It's like, what the heck is that? It's a starburst looking thing. Is it a fan? Is it
Probably the site plan elevation.
Oh, see right there in the back.
That's the HVAC.
Oh, that's the service. Okay, because it looked like it. Yeah. Okay, that's the. You just. Yeah, I know, but you just drew it. Yeah, you just drew it like I've never seen it drawn before. Yeah.
That key.
They're on like every single one of our.
Oh, I know, but I never see it as a little
Always look
fan.
like that.
They don't, but that's just a template we have.
Like the, do that.
Well, it's just what the heck.
Okay. Do you have any other
That was
questions
just,
for the applicant?
that was just for my own. That was for my own curiosity because it's like, oh wow, what's that? Does the applicant want to say anything about this project?
This is a contributing structure from the 1920s, and the applicant has been in her family for almost that long. And it's just been sitting vacant and deteriorating. There's a lot of rot. There isn't a whole lot salvageable, so we want to salvage as much as possible.
And reuse?
We have found a place that does have materials that they repurpose, so we can find some 1920s siding to replace areas that is rotted. So we found a really great resource to help find those like-in-kind materials. So they just want to be able to have this as their little family cottage and vibrant again, 2 bedrooms. We did have on the back a new addition, which is the bathrooms, because currently there are no bathrooms.
I saw the one picture had a bucket in the front, so.
The front porch is currently on tree stumps, so that's not quite
Working out?
The roof has a hole, the tree is
On the roof. So
we basically need to deconstruct it, put it back together, use as many materials as possible, and then find like-in-kind materials to help fill in all the voids and gaps.
What a project.
It's quite a project.
yes.
For an individual, yeah.
Yes.
And it's not that it matters to you or you can't rule on, but it is quite a financial burden.
For a lot of that.
The town is going to allow something with the new rules,
They're
right?
not
At this
currently-
point, there's been no grant application made.
Okay. But it would be allowed if they proceed forward with it in this manner?
We need,
The grant's not on the table right now for us. We're not
Oh.
looking at that right now.
Okay,
So
interesting.
take that off of the brain.
Okay. Just asking. Because that's Mr. Grant over there. All right. Does anyone have any discussions on this project? Looks like it would be great to see this happen instead of melting into the ground. It's doing now. I applaud the individual for
I'll make the motion.
attempting. Yes.
I move to approve to renovate and reconstruct the contributing resource known as Corinne Hayward Home at 3 Wharf Street, subject to conditions that any historic materials which require replacement will be identified in the building permit drawings for compliance, and that the proposed 4x4 front porch columns are appropriate.
Got a second? Any further discussion? No further discussion, so therefore I'm looking for a vote. All in favor, aye? Aye. Any opposed? Looks like we're unanimously approved it.
thanks.
So hey,
Excited.
you know, you got your drawings completed.
Gosh, there's just a lot
That's
going on
that's
in the
probably
contributing structure world right now. So
That's probably a feat in itself. Thank you for your input as always. Another situation in regards to that objective number for discussion. And that's something that we appreciate you being here for those situations.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, boy, yeah, right. Let's see, with that, I'm looking for another type of motion that we all like to hear, and who's going to make that?
I motion that we adjourn this meeting.
I'm looking for a second.
Second.
All in favor, or any discussion? No discussions? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
It looks like it's 8:08.
Thank you.